Hello, so today I'm reading chapter 7, 4 transformations and a meal. The eagle had found him as he sat on the wall in an area that he'd kept as free of snow as he could. The great bird landed beside the boy. "Good," it said. It was twilight and the snow was falling more gently now. "I'm cold," said Odd. I nearly got blown off there a couple of times. I was getting worried I'd have to spend the rest of my life up on this wall. But yes, I'm good. The eagle simply looked at him. "The frost giant's gone," said Odd. "I made him go away." "How?" asked the eagle. "Magic," said Odd, and he smiled and thought, if magic means letting things do what they wanted to do, or he what they wanted to be. "Down," said the eagle. Odd eyed the snowy rocks that made the wall. "I can't climb down that," he said. "I'll die." The eagle launched itself from the edge of the wall and circled downward. It soon returned flapping heavily, carrying a worn-looking, soft leather shoe, which it dropped on the wall beside Odd. Off again it went, into the snowy dusk, and came back with a shoe that was a twin to the first. "They're too big for me," said Odd. "Loki's," said the eagle. "Oh," said Odd, remembering the shoes from Loki's story, the ones that walked in the sky. He pulled them on, and then, warily, heart pounding, Odd limped to the edge of the wall, and when he got to the edge, he stopped. He tried to jump, and nothing happened. He didn't move a muscle. "Oh, come on," he told his feet, his good one and the one that was broken and twisted, the one that hurt all the time. "You've got magical flying shoes on. Just walk out into the air and you'll be fine." But his feet and his legs ignored him, and he stood where he was. He turned to the eagle, who was wheeling above Odd's head impatiently. "I can't do it," he said. "I tried and I can't." The eagle gave a screech, flapped its wings hard, and rose into the snowy air. Another screech. Odd looked around. The eagle was heading straight for him, wings outstretched, hooked beak open wide, talons out, single eye aflame. Odd took an involuntary step backwards, and the eagle's claws missed him by less than the width of a feather. "What was that for?" he shouted at the bird. Then he looked down and saw the ground that wasn't under his feet. He was a very long way up, standing unsupported on the air. "Oh," said Odd. Then he smiled, and he slid down the sky like a boy going down an icy hill, shouting as he did so, something that sounded remarkably like, "Where?" And he landed as light as a snowflake. Odd pushed himself back up into the air and began to jump, 10, 20, 30 feet at a time. He moved towards the cluster of wooden buildings that were Asgard, and did not stop until he heard the sound of cats mewing and mowling. The goddess Freya was nowhere near as scary as Odd had imagined from the frost giant's description. True, she was beautiful, and her hair was golden, and her eyes were the blue of the summer sky. But it was her smile that Odd warmed to, amused and gentle and forgiving. It was safe, that smile, and he told her everything, or almost. When she understood who the 3 animals really were, her smile became wider. "Well, well, well," she said. And then she said, "Boys." They were in the great mead hall now. It was empty, and no fire burned in the hearth. The goddess reached out her right arm. The eagle which had been sitting on the ornately carved back of the highest chair, flapped over and landed awkwardly on her wrist. Its talons gripped her pale flesh so hard that crimson beads of blood welled up. Yet she did not appear to notice this, or to be in any visible discomfort. She scratched the back of its neck and her fingernail, and it preened against her. "Odin All-Father," she said, "wisest of the Aesir, one-eyed battle god, you who drank the water of wisdom from Mimir's well, return to us." And then, with her left hand, she began to reshape the bird, to push at it, to change it. A tall, grey-bearded man with a cruel, wise face stood before them. He was masked, he was naked, something he seemed scarcely to notice, and he walked over to the tall chair, picked up a large grey cloak and an ancient flappy-brimmed hat which Odd could have sworn had not been there the last time he looked, and he put them on. "I was far away," he told Freya absently, "and getting further away with every moment that passed." "Good job." But Freya had already put her attention on the bear and was kneading at it with both hands, pushing and moulding like her mother bear licking her cubs into shape. Beneath her fair hands the bear changed. He was red-bearded and covered in hair, and his upper arms looked as knotted and as powerful as ancient trees. He was the biggest man who was not a giant that Odd had ever seen. He looked friendly, and he winked at Odd, which made the boy feel strangely proud. Odin tossed Thor a tunic, and he walked into the shadows to get dressed. Then he passed and turned back. "I need my hammer," Thor said. "I need Mjolnir." "I know where it is," said Odd, and he turned it into a boulder. "I can show you if you like." "When we've finished the important business at hand, perhaps," said the fox. "Me next." Freya looked at the animal, amused. "You know," she said, "many people will find you much easier to cope with in that shape. Are you sure you don't want me to leave you?" The fox growled. Then the growl became a choked cough, and the fox said, "Fair Freya, you joke with me, but remember the words the bards sing? A woman both fair and just and compassionate, only she can be compared to glorious Freya." "Loki, you caused all of this," she said. "All of it." "Yes," he said, "I admit it. But I found the boy as well. You can't just focus on the bad stuff." "One day," said Freya softly, "I will regret this." But she smiled at herself, and she reached a hand out and touched the black tip of the fox's muzzle, then ran her finger up between its ears and along its spine and all the way up to the very tip of its tail. A shimmer. Then a man stood in front of them, beardless, flame-haired, as pale of skin as Freya herself, eyes like green chips of ice. Odd wondered if Loki had a fox's eyes still, or if the fox had always had Loki's eyes. Thor threw Loki some clothes. "Cover yourself," he said bluntly. Now Freya turned her attention to Odd. Her gentle smile filled his world. "Your turn," she said. "I look like this anyway," said Odd. "I know," said Freya. She knelt down beside him, reached out a hand towards his injured leg. "May I?" If you want to." She picked him up as if he was as light as a leaf and put him down on the great feasting table of the gods. She reached down to his right foot and deftly unhooked it at the knee. She ran a nail across the shin, and the flesh parted. Freya looked at the bone, and her face fell. "It was crushed," she said. "So much that not even I can repair it." And then she said, "But I can help." She pushed her hand into the side of Odd's leg, kneading the smashed bones, pulling together the fragments from inside the leg, smoothing them together. Then she opened the flesh of the foot and repeated the same operation, putting the pieces of foot bone and toe bone back where they were meant to be. And then she encased the skeletal leg and foot in flesh once more, sealed it up, and the goddess Freya attached Odd's leg to Odd, and it was as if he'd always been there. "Sorry," she said. "I did the best I could. It's better, but it's not right." She seemed lost in thought. Then she said brightly, "Why don't I replace it entirely? What about a cat's rear leg, or a chicken's?" Odd smiled and shook his head. "No, thank you. This is good," he said. Odd stood up cautiously, put his weight on his right leg, trying to pretend he had not just seen his leg unhooked at the knee. He leaned on it. It did not hurt. Not really. Not like it used to. "Give it time," said Freya. A huge hand came down and clapped Odd on the shoulder, sending him flying. "Now, laddie," boomed Thor, "tell us just how you defeated the might of the frost giants." He seemed much more cheerful than when he had been a bear. "Well, there was only one of them," said Odd. "When I tell the story," said Thor, "there will be at least a dozen." "I want my shoes back," said Loki. There was a feast that night in the great mead hall of the gods. Odin sat at the end of the table in the magnificent carved chair, saying almost as little as he had when he was an eagle. Thor, on his left side, boomed enthusiastically. Loki, who had to sit down at the far end of the table, was pleasant enough to everyone until he got drunk, and then, like a candle suddenly blowing out, he became unpleasant. And he said mean, foolish, unrepeatable things. And he leered at the goddesses, and soon enough Thor, and a large man with one hand, who Odd thought might have been called Tyr, were carrying Loki from the hall. "He doesn't learn," thought Odd. He thought he had said it to himself in his head, but Freya, who was sitting beside him, said, "No, he doesn't learn. None of them do. And they don't change either. They can't. It's all part of being a god." Odd nodded. He thought he understood a little. Then Freya said, "Have you eaten enough? Have you drunk your fill?" "Yes, thank you," said Odd. Old Odin left his chair and walked towards them. He wiped the goose grease from his mouth with his sleeve, smearing even more grease all over his grey beard. He said quietly into Odd's ear, "Do you know what spring it was you drank from, boy? Where the water came from? Do you know what it cost me to drink there many years ago? You didn't think you defended the frost giants alone, did you?" Odd said only, "Thank you." "No," said Odin, "thank you." The All-Father was leaning on a staff carved with faces, dogs and horses and men and birds and skulls and reindeer and mice and women, all of them wrapped around Odin's stick. You could look at it for hours and still not see every detail on that stick. Odin pushed the staff towards Odd and said, "This is for you." Odd said, "But..." The old god looked at him gently through his one good eye. "It is never wise to refuse the gifts of the gods, boy." Odd said, "Well, thank you." And he took the staff. It was comfortable. It felt as though he could walk a long way as long as he was leaning on that staff. Odin dipped his hand into a pincher, or even a pitcher, and brought it out, holding a small globe of water no larger than a man's eyeball. He placed the water ball in front of a candle flame. "Look into this," he said. Odd looked into the ball of water, and his world became a rainbow. And then it went dark. When he opened his eyes, he was home. And tomorrow, probably wearing my spectacles if I can find them, so I can see the words, I will read the last chapter, chapter 8, afterwards.